Good morning, Shangam School, second graders. Welcome to Monday's home instruction lesson for reading today. Today, I want to teach you that we can use writing strategies we've learned to help us understand our reading a little bit better. Now, I want you to think about the writing strategies we've learned so far this year. Maybe you're thinking about strong beginnings and conclusions. Maybe you were thinking about adding details or something like that. What we're going to learn to do today is we're going to learn to use these writing strategies to notice when other authors are using those same strategies in their own books. So as we're reading, we want to be on the lookout for writing strategies. And when we notice those strategies, it really helps us understand why the author is using them. And it must mean something important. Because if the writer is using those strategies in their book, they're trying to point something out to us, okay? So the first thing that I want to talk about is comparisons. If you remember from last week, I explained to you what a simile and a metaphor was. And I'm going to switch screens just for a second. I'm going to make myself teeny tiny. And I'm going to show you, one moment. Ta-da! There's our anchor chart from last week. Comparing using similes and metaphors. Similes use things such as like or as to compare two things. They were like two peas in a pod. As sweet as pie, she's as sweet as pie. Or her eyes sparkle like a diamond. When we're comparing those two things, this is the author's way of trying to paint a picture in our mind to make sure that we are understanding what they're saying. They're making their language creative, so it's not dull, it's not boring, and it makes their stories come alive a lot more by using similes and metaphors. And again, a metaphor now is when they compare using is, was, are, or were. She is a fish. They were tornadoes at recess. The snow was a blanket. Again, you're going to see these used a lot in books that you're reading. They're very common, and you just have to know to pay attention. Now that you know what a simile and a metaphor is, you know what to be looking for. The next thing I want to teach you is something that you have seen before, believe it or not, and it was back when we were in kindergarten and we were first learning how to read. And that thing is called repetition. Repetition is so important in reading. And in the beginning stages of reading, we use repetition because as you're learning to read, seeing a pattern of things repeat help you become a strong reader. And at first, you're just memorizing those words. You're memorizing the pattern. But by doing that and repeating things over and over and over again and seeing those same words, lines, or phrases over and over and over again, you eventually start to learn those words. And then you're able to then recognize those words in other texts. So I am going to move my little camera, my little self. Hopefully I can move it up here. Yep, there we go. And I want to show you an example of repetition in an older book. Now, if you remember back in kindergarten, we used to read a lot of those Froggy books. And Froggy goes to school, Froggy has a Valentine, things like that, right? But in all of the Froggy books, anytime he is walking or hopping or moving, he goes flop, 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 or hop, hop, hop. And that's a repetition of those words. But in second grade, one of the mentor texts that we use often is called The Leaving Morning by Angela Johnson. And in that book, I want to show you a couple ways that Angela Johnson used repetition in The Leaving Morning. And the first way is on page 2, she said, "We pressed our faces against the hall window and left cold lips on the pane." So that's our first introduction, right? And then on page 21, she goes, I made more lips on the deli window and watched the movers on the leaving morning. And then on page 28, she says again, so I left lips on the front window of our apartment and said goodbye to our old place on the leaving morning. So there's two things repeating here. And even in the very beginning of this book, which I didn't include in here, I think it even starts out on the leaving morning. So one of the things that keeps repeating is that phrase, on the leaving morning. And a repetition, as you can see here, is when a word, a line, or a stanza is something that we use in poetry, repeats over and over again. And so we see that line, the leaving morning, on the leaving morning, repeating several times throughout this book. But the other thing that we're seeing repeating is that they're leaving their lips, that print of their lips. If you've ever, kissed a window on a cold day or something like that, you can see the outline of your lips. And so on page 2, they left their lips. On page 21, so they left their lips in the apartment on the window. And then on page 21, they left their lips on the window in the deli across the street. And then on page 28, they're leaving their lips again on that window. And this repetition is important because the author is really trying to tell us something. This family and these kids, they're moving on. They're moving from this apartment that they've lived in for we don't know how long, right? And they're starting life somewhere new. And this kind of symbolizes, it's leaving a message that even though they're leaving a piece of them behind by leaving their lips there. It symbolizes that even though they're no longer there, those lips on the window kind of say, hey, we were here. This is where part of our life was, right? Now, the third thing I want to show you is something, again, that you've probably seen over and over again. It shows up a lot in younger books because it's fun, it's silly, and you probably don't even realize, again, that it's this thing, and that is called alliteration. And alliteration, which unfortunately, hold on, I'm going to move this over. Whoops, I ended the slideshow. It's not what I wanted to do. Let's try that again. Bear with me. Here we go. Alliteration, which is, this is going to get cut off a little bit, but I think you can still understand it. And I'm going to move my camera back down. Hi. Alliteration is when two or more nearby words share the same beginning sound. And we often call these tongue twisters, like Sally sells seashells at the seashore, right? And in this case, I made up some little ones here. Pete the penguin likes pizza and pickles. The words aren't necessarily right next to each other. There's some words in between them, but there is a repetition of that p sound, right? The other one is monkeys make major messes. Again, they all start with that same sound. And then the last example I gave was Billy blows big blue bubbles, all starting with the b sound. And alliteration is fun. It's a fun thing to throw in stories, and a lot of authors will use that as well. It has a good sound to it. It's a great way to start a story if you're going to write something. So I love alliteration. I think it's fun. I think they're fun to try to say. And like I said, a lot of authors will use these because they make their writing come to life. It makes it more interesting to read. And we want to be on the lookout for this in our reading this week, okay? So there's one more thing I want to show you before we leave. If I can get out of here. I'm going to go to a story in Epic. And this is about a skunk who likes soup. And on this page right here, page 17, I'm just going to highlight this page where it says, "I'm so sorry, Susie," said Sammy. He wiped up the soupy mess. Susie was silent as a stone, and her face was stormy. Right here, there are fantastic examples of figurative language. We start off with that alliteration. So sorry, Susie, said Sammy. They all have that sound. And then we go into Susie was silent as a stone. Those similes and metaphors. When I'm using as, it's a simile rather. And then when they say her face was stormy, they're comparing her face to a storm, right? That's a metaphor. So right here on one page, we have 2 examples of figurative language, and really 3, because we have a simile, a metaphor, and alliteration. The only thing we don't see here is repetition. Lines aren't repeating necessarily right here on this page. Either way, what I want you to do today, I want you to go to your book bags. I want you to go on Epic. I want you to go on RazKids. Whatever it is you are reading today for your 20 minutes, I want you to be on the lookout for figurative language. And I am going to show you this right here. Again, I have to move my camera. This is the work that I want you to do today. Figurative language. What did you discover? Use this space to write, record, or take a picture of figurative language you discovered in the books you're reading at home. Tell us if it was alliteration, repetition, or a comparison. And if you're able to, tell us whether it was a simile or a metaphor. If you're able to figure that out, I would love to see that. Okay. Have a fantastic day, guys. I can't wait to see you again tomorrow for another reading lesson. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.